This is the fourth lesson of the Next Generation Security Management training. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the access control policy. In this lesson, we're going to cover the following topics. We're going to talk about the access control section in order to understand the role of each tab and each section available in this view. We're going to talk about the unified access control policy, so basically how we work with it. We're going to talk more about access control policy layers. How does inline and audit mode work? And do you remember software-defined protection? So we're going to try to map access control section with the management and control layer inside the software-defined protection. We're going to talk about the access control settings. So basically, how do I configure the blade settings? What is installation history, etc. And whoops, what should I do if thing goes wrong? So let's move forward to the access control section in order to understand the role of each tab and section available. We have the multiple different gateway blades, our firewall blade, application control, URL filtering, data prevention blade, mobile access, IPsec, well to service, desktop policy, and so on. All of these settings for these different blades have been moved into the access control section of the security policies view, in order to make it more simple to work with and have everything unified in one location. Within access control section and security policies, we are able to work with multiple policy packages simultaneously. This allows us to work in a much more efficient way, where I can copy rules between different policy packages and do changes at the same time in different policy packages in one view. In the top, I have a search bar and a couple of buttons that will assist me in my daily changes in the security policy. For example, I have a quickly navigate to sections button that will allow me to navigate to different section titles within the policies. If I'm, for example, clicking the cleanup section title here, it will directly navigate me down to the cleanup section of this security policy. The install policy button in the policy we're looking at will only install the access control policy of that policy package. As you remember, when we did the overview of the Smart Console, we also had an install policy button in the top here. This will allow you to install any policy package, but you need to select that, and then you need to install it towards your gateways. Once pressing the install policy button, we will see the number of changes that has been done on the policy since last installation. And you're also going to see the total number of sessions that those changes has been done in and how many administrators have been doing these changes. So I can get a better understanding of which changes I are implementing into the security gateway for better collaboration. If I'm pressing the link, I will get detailed information of the different session and the number of changes that has been done in those sessions. If I click the audit logs, I get detailed information of exactly what kind of changes has been done, and I can double click on these log entries to see exactly, for example, which rule or which object there has been a change done on, and I can see the administrator who did this change. I know if I'm going to install my colleagues' changes as well once doing a policy installation. If I press the view button, I had the possibility to launch a read-only view of that security policy to get a graphical view of how the security policy looks like before the changes to the current policy. Under the actions, I had a possibility to export the security policy to a CSV file, or I can press history. History allows me to revert or undo changes on a specific policy or rule base, which means that if I want to revert some changes inside my rule base, I don't need to revert the entire database. I can only select to revert that specific policy to go back to basically square one. During the revert options, I had also here the possibilities to view this policy that I want to revert to in read-only mode before reverting. Pressing the revert button will allow me to revert the policy inside my management server to an earlier release. And of course, I'll be notified that I will revert the current layer if I press yes here to the one I selected. Indicators, as explained earlier, will allow you to quickly identify rules where we, for example, have edited changes, or if those rules are being locked by other administrators and so on. So we're going to see those highlighted on the right side of the rule base, and I can click on it and it will automatically direct me to this rule that is either being locked by another administrator or is being currently edited by me in my current session. For more efficiency, we have policy applications that will quickly provide you details of the rule base. If I click my rule number 1 here, I can see that it was created by random task, and I can add, for example, additional rule information. So I can write, for example, that it was created by an automation task. This was the ticket number, and this was, for example, the requester. So I have additional fields to provide more information about the rule base or the rule, in addition to the information field we're having previously. If I click the Details tab, it will show me the detailed information about the rules. So I can expand the group object and see the different groups that are assigned to this group object being used inside this rule. If I press the Logs tab, it will filter out the logs that are related to this specific rules. So I don't need to open the logs and monitoring view to troubleshoot a certain rule. I can do that for more efficiently directly inside the rule base. And of course, in here, if I right-click on, for example, source, I can click on Create Host. It will automatically fill in the IP address of that host object that I'm creating, and I'll assign a name to it. And then I can assign this newly created host object into the rule base. The Audit tab or History tab will allow me to see who did what and when on a certain rule. So I can basically see the lifespan of this rule. When was it created, who have modified the rule, and so on. And I can see it from the beginning of when I created the rule or just the last 7 days, for example. We talked about the access control section and the different tabs and buttons available in there. Let's move forward and talk about the unified access control policy specifically and how you work with it. In the past, all rule bases was basically talking different kinds of languages. There was no unified logging and no unified user check. In R80, what we have tried to do is that we merge the access control blades policies into a unified access control policy to simplify configuration of access control. So this is basically done by unifying firewall, caching control, and URL filtering, data awareness, and mobile access blade into one unified rule base. This rule base still works on the first match basis, so from top to down matching mechanism. By editing the policy, you can easily add blades to the rule base through the layer settings. So here you're also able to add other policy types such as quality of service and desktop policies, or define your installation targets for the policy. By right-clicking on the layer under Access Control Policy, you're able to change the settings of that layer and add blades for unification. So please remember that a layer in R80 is basically a building block with rules, and a policy must always have some kind of rules. Therefore, a policy will always to start with contain at least one layer, for example, the firewall layer, and that's the starting and building block for the security policy package. And then we can add additional layers, etc. The layer editors allows us to activate and deactivate blades in the layer to create a unified access control policy that is basically data and application aware. So I can decide to either create a new layer, or I can, in the existing layer inside my policy package, easily activate additional blades to create a unified policy. So if I do that, this, as mentioned, will create a unified access control policy that is both data and application aware. So it provides a policy that is very easy to manage and allows granular control of traffic between different segments. Now, please remember, to create a unified access control policy, we need to push this down onto a R80.10 gateways. The R7 gateways does not support the unified access control policies. Inside the rule base, under the services and applications column, we have unified services and applications into one object. So each application will have its own recommended services that can be manually overridden if needed. In order to see the different services that this application has been unified with, you can easily see that by holding the mouse over the application object, and you can change it by right-clicking on the object, press Edit Object, and then select Match Settings to customize to your own services that you want this application to be delivered over. In R80, we have a number of predefined data types that can be used for the data awareness blade. This is going to be called the content awareness blade in R80.10. So in order to use data aware policies that can inspect data of traffic over SMTP, HTTP, HTTPS, or FTP protocols, you need to have a R80.10 gateway. And this blade is going to be called Content Awareness Blade in R80.10. Here's an example on how you can control traffic using the data awareness blade to get better security. So for example, if I have an e-commerce site where my customers are registering their credit card number to buy whatever I'm selling. So in this case, I can create a data aware policy that says that I am allowed to upload credit card numbers to my web server over HTTPS. But I am not allowed to download my credit card's numbers over any type of other service. And then I am allowed to do any other type of communications towards the web server. So this basically means that if someone is trying to do a SQL injection attack and for some reason the IPS is not detecting this, then the data that would have been retrieved in this SQL injection attack that would have contained the credit card numbers would have been blocked by rule number 7, saying that you're not allowed to retrieve credit card numbers towards a client. The first rule would not allow the retrieval, since this is only allowing you to upload traffic to the web server, not download traffic from the web server. So I can set the direction of how I would like to inspect the data inside each and every rule. Basically, this rule will block credit cards being sent over untrusted channels and ensure that no one is downloading credit cards from my e-commerce servers. Mobile Access Blade has been unified into the Unified Access Control Policy. Mobile Access Policy used to be configured in its own authorization table, where authorization was based on user groups only. Rule order was insignificant and there were no deny rules. And it would apply both to HTTPS applications, so for example web files, webmail, Citrix and so on, and the SSL tunneling, so networking applications over SNX. Within the Unified Access Control Policy, it's now possible to control mobile access as well. By default, the behavior is the same, so we're going to use the traditional mobile access policy, but I can modify the following attributes. If I have my checkpoint gateway, I click on mobile access, I can change this from legacy policy to Unified Access Policy in order to change the behavior. Also, to control mobile access authorizations in the Unified Access Control Policy, I need to activate that layer with that blade. So I open my layer editor, I'm enabling the layer for mobile access, and I'll press OK, and this will then allow me to create a unified policy with mobile access rules as well. So I had two steps. I need to activate it on my gateway object, and then I need to activate it on the layer where I want to use mobile access applications. And yes, this will require an R80.10 gateway. Mobile access blade will only understand rules with a mobile access blade application defined, like we have in rule number 5, or if we have an access role in the source column of that rule that's being pushed towards the mobile access blade enabled gateway. In the access control policy, actions is now unified with user check and bandwidth limit. For each action, you can have a customized message, and the ask action will, by default, block connections. In order to enable user check or limit actions, you basically need to activate application control or data awareness blade in that layer where you want to enable user check for a rule in the policy, which will give you more options to select from in the action column. Now, user check can also be applied to standard services, so for example, a standard firewall service. Note, in this case, we're only matching on a SIM package, and please remember that the default action is drop. So in order to have a good user experience, you would like to install the user check agent on the machine so the user are able to answer the user check question, because with a standard firewall service, like for example an ask question on a telnet service, we're not able to send a user check message inside traffic flow. So therefore we need to post that to a user check agent. If you right click and press more options, you will provide additional action settings. So for example, you can set how often the user check message should pop up, and if you want to enable identity capture portal, or if you want to limit the bandwidth for this rule. In R80, we have unified logging. So basically we have 4 types of log options. So we have the network log. It will basically generate a log with basic firewalling information. For example, source port, destination port, source IP address, destination IP address, and so on. Then we have the log option. It's like a network log with firewalling information, but will also include application intelligence and URL information like HTTP resource. The full log is a complete log that will, in addition to the networking log and log options, include data awareness data types that were matched. Now, please note that in R80.10, the unified logging parameters are going to change. And then we have the last of these log options, that is of course none, which means no log. To summarize this, by enabling mobile access blade, data awareness, application control, URL filtering as blades inside the layer, you're able to create a unified access control policy to control and enforce traffic between segments, that is application and data aware, with unified actions and logging. Now please remember, in order to create a unified policy, you need to have a R80.10 gateway to enforce this policy. In chapter 3, we're going to talk about layers in access control policy. So we're going to talk about how the inline and ordered layer mode works, and how I manage the different layers. With layers, we can provide a better, more structured security policy, as well as better security by ensuring that one rule is not able to affect the whole rule base, where layers allow separation of security policies into multiple components, creating better security and manageability. So it supports concurrent administrations and segregation of duties, as we saw earlier, and will, in the future, also allow installations per layer towards a security gateway instead of installations per policy package. Reuse of layer, either as inline or ordered mode in a multiple policy package, allows us to work in a more efficient ways, and this basically provides a modularity with endless flexibility. So let's go over how, from a logical view, the packet flow works with a policy using layers in ordered mode. So in this policy package, we basically have 3 layers. We have our access layer with, for example, our firewall. We have our content layer with, for example, our application control and URL filtering, and we have our data awareness layer inside this policy package, divided as 3 different layers implemented in ordered mode. So in the first example, we're going to have a package being inspected by the access layer rule base, and it's going to match rule number 8, and in this rule it's just going to be dropped, so no further inspection needs to be done. In the second example, the package is going to match rule number 12, and it's going to be accepted. Therefore, it's going to move forward to the next ordered layer and being inspected from top to down, and in this case it's matching rule number 10, and it's going to be dropped. In the third example, we're being accepted by rule number 7 in the access layer. We're being accepted in the next layer, content layer, by rule number 10, and then we move forward and being inspected from top to down in the data awareness layer and being accepted by rule number 8, which means that the package is going to reach its final destination. Now, please remember that this is just a logical view of how rule-based matching is working. Behind the scenes, on the engine, on the gateway, matching is working in a much more efficient way. In next example, we're looking at the packet flow when we're using a layer in inline modes. In this case, we have our access layer, and inside the access layer we have a parent rule. This rule is pointing towards the little pan e-commerce layer. So traffic will match the parent rule, for example, traffic coming from internet to the web servers inside the e-commerce data center. Then traffic is going to be pointed to be inspected by the sub-rules inside this inline layer. In this case, traffic is being dropped by rule 5.4 and is not further inspected. In the next example, the traffic is being matched by the parent rule 5, pointing towards the little pan e-commerce layer. And inside that layer, traffic is going to be accepted by the sub-rule 5.3 and being accepted to its final destination. We can also use a combination of inline and ordered mode. So in this case, traffic is being allowed by rule number 5 in the access layer. That rule number 5 is a parent rule pointing to the little pan e-commerce layer, accepting traffic in the sub-rule 5.3. Once traffic is accepted in the inline layer in the sub-rules, it's going to move forward to the next ordered layer, since we're using a combination of inline and ordered layer. The next ordered layer is going to be the content layer, so we're going to be inspected from top to down. We're accepted by rule number 10, so we move forward to the next ordered layer, in this case the data awareness layer, and we're going to be inspected from top to down, and we're going to be accepted by rule number 8, and traffic is moving forward to the final destination. So how can we manage layers? We can manage layers under the Manage Layer tool, under the main navigation bar. So if you select that, it will allow you to create, manage, and view all the different access control layers that you have within your security management server. So you can see the access control layer name. You can see which policy packages are using these access control layers. So in this case, you can see that the application control and URL filtering layer is a shared layer that's being used in 2 different policy packages, while the other layers are only used in one package, either in inline or ordered mode, while the application control and URL filtering is used both in inline and ordered mode. So yes, we can see the mode they're implemented in, as well as the administrator who created it and last changed the layer. If I select Show Only Shared Layers, and this checkbox is enabled by default, I will only see the layers that is enabled for sharing between different policy packages. It doesn't mean that they need to be shared between different policy packages. It means that they're only enabled to allow them to share them between different policy packages. So if you open the Manage Layers tools and you don't see any layers in here, it's most probably because this checkbox is selected. So uncheck that and you will see all your layers inside your security management server. If I double click on the little pan e-commerce layer, for example, I will see the following information of that specific layer from the layer editor, allowing me to change the settings of this specific layer. So I can, for example, easily enable and disable different security software blades on that layer. I can enable it for sharing, which allow me to have this layer activated on multiple different pulse packages to reuse it. I can add tags to my layers in order to search and group layers by tags for better control of my different layers. Under the advanced sections, I have the possibility to control the proxy configuration and the implicit cleanup rule for the layer. So the proxy configuration applies to application control, URL filtering, and identity awareness. So proxy configuration on each layer allows us to define which layer you want to enforce the X-Forwarder for field. The X-Forwarder for field checkbox proxy configuration on each gateway provides granularity in terms of enforcing and hiding X-Forwarder for header. In addition to this, we can select on the layer if we want to enforce the X-Forwarder for header for the rule basis, or if we want to use the original IP address in the source. The implicit cleanup rule is added with every layer, and we can change the behavior of that. The reason for this is because when we're working with application control and URL filtering layers, for example, for backward compatibility, the implicit cleanup rule needs to be set to accept. So if I create a dedicated layer for application control and URL filtering that I need to push down to R7.something gateway, I need to remember to change the implicit cleanup rule to accept in my layer that I created. Permissions allows me to set admin restrictions to the layer. So I can segregate duties to enable administrators to manage basically parts of the organization. So in the top here, we will see the different permission profiles that are allowed to manage rules inside this layer depending on the blade activation. So if I have a permission profile that's only allowed to work with application control and URL filtering rules, and this layer is only activated for application control and URL filtering rules, then that permission profile will automatically be assigned to this layer based on the blades that are activated for the permission profile and the layer. Further down, we can see the permission profiles that I manually specify to be allowed to manage this layer. So I create a permission profile and then assign that permission profile to my different layers where I want to allow my administrators to work with rules inside that layer. So using inline mode, I can get a more structured and organized rule base. So in order to use inline mode, I need to choose a specific rule that I want to use as a parent rule. For example, rule number 5, where I have my traffic from anywhere towards my web servers in my e-commerce data center. I'm going to allow HTTP and HTTPS traffic, and then I want to point that down to a specific layer, an inline layer. So instead of action accept, we'll change that to inline layer, and then I'll select my predefined layers that are enabled for sharing, or I can create a new layer. If I want to view the rules that are inside an inline layer, so I want to see the sub-rules of rule 5 that is inside the little pan e-commerce layer, I need to click on the triangle button here. This will expand the rule base and it will show me the sub-rules of the parent rule 5. So they're going to be numbered with the parent rule number and then the sub-rules rule number for that layer. So only traffic that is matching the parent rule will reach and be inspected by the subrule inside the inline layer. So first of all, traffic needs to be destinated towards the web server, and it needs to be either HTTP or HTTPS service. Otherwise, they're not going to be inspected by the following rules. If it's not HTTP and HTTPS services, it's going to jump over the subrules and be inspected by rule number 6, in this case the cleanup rule, and be dropped. If it's HTTP traffic, it's going to be inspected by rule number 1, and it's not going to match. It's going to be inspected by rule number 2. If it doesn't contain credit card numbers, it's not going to match. It's going to be inspected by rule number 3, and it's going to be allowed. If it's not matched there either, it's going to be dropped. In ordered mode, we can basically segregate duties based on, for example, IT operational need. So we can use layers in ordered mode by editing the policy and assign a layer to that policy. So what I'll do is I'll right-click on the policy option. This will open the policy editor, allowing me to add additional layers to my policy package in ordered mode. So I'll just right-click on access control, and this is allowing me to assign new layers or reuse existing layers inside my policy package, and they are going to be implemented in ordered mode. Once I create a new layer in ordered mode, I need to define a name, and then I need to activate the software blades I want to use. In this example, we're creating a new layer called application control and URL filtering. We're only activating application control and URL filtering blades for this layer. Please remember that if I want to use this policy as backward compatibility policy for R7 gateways, I need to change the implicit cleanup rule to accept for this layer where I'm installing the policy. After I added a layer to my policy package, I am able to change the order of the layers. So if I want to inspect my network layer first and then application control URL filtering, or vice versa. Remember to use order layers for R7 gateways. The order of the network layer and application control and URL filtering layer is extremely important. So you need to start with the network layer. That's the firewall layer with only firewall rules. And then the next ordered layer needs to be the application control and URL filtering. This will create the same behavior as we have in R7, where we have our firewall policy first, and then we have our application control and URL filtering policy as the second policy. If I, for some reason, is trying to install an unsupported order of layers towards a pre-R80 gateway, I will get the following policy verification error message when installing it towards my, for example, R77 gateway. Rule base that has application control and URL filtering, data awareness or mobile access blades turned on for the first layer cannot be installed in gateway of versions earlier than R80. Because we can't have a unified policy on pre-R80 gateways, and we cannot have a layer with application control as the first layer. We need to have the firewall blade as the first layer in pre-R80 gateways. Also, if I install a policy with a wrong implicit cleanup rule, as for example a drop action in the application control and URL filtering layer, I will get the following verification error. So this policy cannot be installed on gateways below version R80. To successfully install this policy, make sure that the implicit cleanup rule for the first layer, so that's the firewall layer, in the policy is set to dropped, and the implicit cleanup rule for the second layer, that's the application control and URL filtering layer, is set to accept. The implicit cleanup rule needs to be configured like this for backward compatibility gateways. So do you remember software-defined protection architecture? Now we're going to try to map access control in R80 with the management and control layer inside the software-defined protection architecture. So the software-defined protection architecture states that the management layer needs to be modular to support segmentation and segregation of management duties. For better modularity, R80 provides the possibilities to segregate duties based on IT operational need and segregate duties based on organizational structure need. So we have the data awareness permissions assigned to Patty O'Brien, who is the data awareness security administrator within the Verticon Industries. He's working within that department, within those IT operations. And then we have Mini-Me, who is responsible for the data center layer on our organizational structure within the Verticon Industries. So we have assigned permissions on organizational need for that administrator within the R80 management server. So let me introduce Scott Evil, that is the Verticon Industries application control and URL filtering admin for providing a clean internet. So we're assigning Scott Evil permissions to work with application control and URL filtering and segregating his duties based on IT operational needs, since he's working within that IT operations department within the organization. So if we're looking at Scott Evil's permission profile, we have assigned permission to allow him to work with application control and URL filtering. So basically this means that we created a permission profile called Evil Internet Access Permission Profile. Scott Evil under access control is allowed to show the access control policy, and he can edit layers by software blades that are being activated. So if we have a layer where we only activated application control and URL filtering, Scott Evil will be allowed to change rules inside that layer. If we have a layer where we only have firewall enabled, Scott Evil will not be allowed to work with the rules inside that layer because it's not part of his IT operational structure. So if you open the application control and URL filtering layer inside the layer editor and click on permissions, we can see that the Evil Internet Access Permission Profile has automatically been assigned to this layer, since in this layer we only activated it for application control and URL filtering blade. If Scott Evil opens the rule base inside the R80 management server and tries to do changes in the network layer where we have firewall rules, we'll only be able to see those rules, but he's not going to be able to edit them. If he instead clicks on the application control and URL filtering layer where we assign permissions to Scott Evil, he will be able to do changes within this layer for this policy package. Let me now instead introduce Bigglesworth. So Bigglesworth is Verticon Industries e-commerce admin. So for Bigglesworth, we segregated duties based on business organizational need, because Bigglesworth needs to work within the e-commerce part of the organization. So we provided permissions based on that structure and allowing him to do changes within the Little Pan e-commerce layer. So the way to do this is to create a permission profile for Bigglesworth, in this case called Little Pan e-commerce read and write profile. Under the access control permissions, he's allowed to see the access control policy. But now instead of editing layers by software blades, we're going to allow him to edit layers by selected profiles in the layer editor, which means that I need to manually assign this profile to the layer where Bigglesworth should be allowed to work. So if we create a Little Pan e-commerce layers where we have the different rules for the e-commerce data center and click on permission, I need to select the profile, in this case the Little Pan profile, that I would like to assign permissions for to be able to work with this layer. As you see, Patty O'Brien's and Scott Evil's permission profiles are not being assigned to this layer, since we have enabled it for both data awareness, firewalling, and application control and URL filtering. And Scott Evil, for example, would only be allowed to work with this layer if only application control and URL filtering was enabled. Now, if Bigglesworth logs into the policy, and in this case we have a unified policy, we have our rule base where we have our first rule, and then we have a parent rule, rule number 5, pointing towards a Little Pan e-commerce layer. Bigglesworth will not be allowed to manipulate the rules in the main layer. He's only allowed to change the rules in the inline layer, Little Pan e-commerce layer. So he's going to be able to see the other rules, but he can't edit them, but he have read and write permissions to the sub-rules that is part of the inline layer towards his e-commerce data center. Now, within software-defined protection, we have something called control layer, which needs to control the interactions between user, assets, data, and applications. So the unified access control policy allows granular control down to application and data level of interactions between different segments that the enforcement point is controlling. Rule bases allows to have multiple different threat prevention profiles per gateways as well inside the control layer, where we can define protections per access profile, zone, VLAN, network group, host, and so on. So layers in the access control policy basically allows endless flexibility, where we can, for example, reuse layers to simplify management of different policy packages towards different gateways. Let's talk about the access control settings. Basically, how do I configure blade settings and what is the installation history and so forth. So, installation history basically allows us to revert the policy on a specific security gateway, an already precompiled policy, which means that I don't need to do changes on my management server. I just need to select my gateway object, and then I need to select the policy I want to revert to get back to square one. This essentially means that if someone has done changes to a gateway that breaks communications, and you don't want to troubleshoot those changes that your colleague have been doing, you can easily just revert the changes and then ensure that traffic is flowing on the old policy, and you can talk to your colleague and ask them to start troubleshooting the changes they did in the management server before they install the policy, for example, the next day. It's a quick way to revert changes without doing changes on the management server. Before reverting the policy, I can of course review the changes that are being installed in the previous policy package. I can also, if I would like to, get more detailed information. For example, I can open this already compiled policy into read-only mode in Smart Console. So if I select a policy and click specific version, I will quickly recover without losing all the changes I did on the management server. In terms of engine settings, those have now been unified into manage and settings. So under management settings, you have a blades option. Under the blades option, you can configure the different engine settings for your different software security blades. In terms of access control and application control and URL filtering, you have the advanced setting that allows you to configure how the application control and URL filtering engine should work. You have the inspection settings that allows you to configure how different inspection methods or aggressive aging for the firewall and so on should work within the access control policy. So, what should I do if something goes wrong? Well, when opening a service request to the Technical Assistance Center, you should of course send the CP info file. But in addition to that, if you know that there are issues with access control, you should collect the following log files. So you should collect the cpm.elg, that's the place to be. You can start reviewing that file and see if you have some kind of error message that will hint to where you have issues. And you can also check the install_policy.elg file. It can give you hints on what went wrong during the policy installation cycle. So let's move forward to the access control lab. Lab number 2, the access control lab, are divided into 5 sections. So in the first section, you're going to familiarize yourself with the access control view inside Smart Console, and you're going to build a new policy package called backward compatibility package. In the second section, you're going to build a unified access control policy that you're going to call Verticon Industries. While we're going to continue working with layers, in the third section, we're going to learn how to work with layers in ordered mode and add application control and URL filtering in ordered mode into the backward compatibility policy we created in the first section. We're going to install this backward compatibility policy towards our R77.30 gateway. In the fourth section, we're going to work with layers in inline mode, and we're going to add a new layer that is focusing on the LittlePan e-commerce data center rules and add that layer into the Verticon Industries policy. In the fifth section, we're going to play around with the flexibility around layers, where we're going to reuse the application control and URL filtering layer that's used in the backward compatibility policy and place that into the Verticon Industries policies, so we can work with shared layers. We're going to play around with that. In order to get access to the lab guide, you can use this short URL. So it's Google/LF, and it's a lowercase l nrq. So that's the URL you need to connect to. Same URL as you used for the previous labs in the Smart Console section. Good luck.